In a powerful show of support for nature, nearly every government in the world united behind the CBD's sweeping biodiversity plan for life on Earth. They committed to halting the extinction of threatened animal, plant, and fungi species. And in an historic first, they also committed to helping those species recover, so that the life we share our planet with can not only survive, but thrive. Making these goals a reality will take all of us working together. Reverse the Red is supporting governments, conservation experts, and communities around the world as they join forces to activate tried and tested tools and tie global efforts to local expertise. All in a coordinated effort to assess, plan, and act for wildlife. Together, we can save species from extinction. Together, we can secure our planet's future. Together, we can reverse the red.
Welcome, everyone. We are so excited that you are here with us today. I am Megan Joyce. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator for Reverse the Red. And I just wanted to say a couple quick words from Reverse the Red because we are really excited to play host to a series of really important conversations around fungal conservation. And so this one is the first of three. We will share the links. If you haven't registered for the next two, please do so because we will continue this conversation over the next couple of weeks. But this is putting fungi on the agenda. You may be here because you saw the Global Fungi Strategy was released, and the team who put it together are really looking for consultation, looking for comments, looking for all of your feedback. And Reverse the Red is really excited about this strategy and the movement for fungi and fungal conservation. And so on behalf of Reverse the Red and our governing council, which includes our co-chairs, the IUCN Species Survival Commission and World Association of Zoos and Aquariums, as well as Botanic Gardens Conservation International, Rewild, the Toronto Zoo, and ZSL, we are really excited and hope that you are too, to see this monumentous new strategy come to light. And really looking forward to hearing all of your feedback and suggestions for this as we move forward. So that's all from me until we get to questions at the end, but I want to introduce and turn it over to Greg Mueller, who is the chair of the Fungal Conservation Committee for the IUCN Species Survival Commission, and he will lead you through today's discussion.
Great. Thanks, Megan. You've got to stop sharing so I can share. So yeah, so as Megan said, this is the first of three webinars where we'll be introducing the global strategy for fungal conservation. I'm joined by my two compatriots here, Katia Quintero and Rachel Hoffman. And let me just see if I can get this going. Yes, share. I don't multitask all the time, Will. Oh, look at that. Close. So yeah, so this is the first of three webinars. Today, what I want to do is kind of introduce why we believe there is a need to have a strategy, a little bit of the history of how we put it together, and then make a call for your engagement and your participation in the process. And then on June 9th, we'll have the second seminar or webinar, and Katya will spend a little bit more time giving more details about what the status of what the strategy is, what it looks like, some of the pieces of that. And Rachel will also join on that, talking about how that fits into a national context. Because we're talking about a global strategy, but you can have a national context that uh, fits in within the global strategy. So that's kind of the goal for what we want to do over the next couple of weeks. So the talk today, is putting fungi on the agenda, catalyzing global policy and action for fungal conservation. And let me see if I can get this to move. Why is it not? There it is. Got to move my bars around here. It's in the way. So, fungi are having a moment, right? When I was growing up, anytime people talked about fungi, it was about death and destruction and things like that. I had this wonderful movie that we saw in high school called Our Moldy Earth, where it was about the dank, dark fungi that were rotting the world. But now we have headlines about how fungi will save the world. Saving the world's fungi might save us too. So we had a real transition in some regards on how people view fungi and their importance. And that is translated to a growing number of countries, organizations, NGOs, like and universities that are starting to include fungi when they talk about biodiversity. So they're including the third F in fauna, flora, and funga. They're including fungi when they talk about animals, plants, and fungi when they talk about biodiversity. So, that's great. But fungi are still rarely included in national, regional, and international conservation policy and actions. And an example of this was the tagline or the view for the United Nations Decade of Biodiversity that ended 5 years ago, but it's still relevant. You can see the fish and the birds and the tree and the butterfly and the bear and whatever else. There's no fungi in there because fungi were not mentioned at all during that process, that initiative for the United Nations Decade of Biodiversity. And this has implications. Fungi are um, one of the largest mega diverse groups of organisms, second only to invertebrates, with an estimated, with now about just under 200,000 species described out of an estimated 2.5 million species. But it's not just species diversity that we have. We've got incredible morphological and ecological diversity. There are 18 phyla of fungi, ranging from single-celled chytrids like up in the top to the molds that are growing in your refrigerator when you forgot to throw the fruit out, to yeasts, to other molds and mildews, and to macrofungi, to the humongous fungus, one of the largest organisms on the planet. So this diversity of fungi really is species, morphological, ecological. And I love this graphic. This was put together a couple years ago for World Soil Day, which talking about caring for the planet starts from the ground and talking about the importance of healthy soil. Well, fungi are a critical major component of healthy soil. And so when you look at that, you think of that healthy soil, is there for mitigating and adapting for climate change, for achieving food security, for providing clean water, improving nutrition, part of the whole aspect of preserving biodiversity. And by doing all that, hopefully mitigating against disasters like forced migration, food insecurity, et cetera, et cetera. In this example, here's a view of a Midwestern US woodland. And so we've got these oak trees in front and grasses and other herbs on the ground. There's probably in there some deer and other critters, and there's definitely insects and whatever in there. But when I look at that, I'm seeing the lichens that are on the bark, the thinking about the endophytes that are in the leaves. These are not are microfungi that are impacting and providing drought resistance and pathogen resistance. All the grasses and most of the herbs form arbuscular mycorrhizae. They are obligately associated to bring in nutrients and water to those plants. The oaks, and if there's any pines or anything in here, are obligately associated with ectomycorrhizae. And even our orchids require orchid mycorrhizas to be able to germinate their spores, thrive, and develop. And that's not even talking about the wood decomposers, the insect-associated fungi, all the other fungi in the community. So just a few pieces of data. Fungi have been estimated to store about a third of the carbon from fossil fuel emissions. So we think of plants being um, sequestering carbon, capturing carbon through photosynthesis, but they bring that down into their roots, into the soil, and then it goes into the fungi that do the long-term sequestration that puts the carbon deeper in the soil to make sure it's not released again. So for climate mitigation, climate adaptation, fungi are critical for that component. There's a growing set of data that shows the importance of fungi in regenerative and sustainable agriculture, both as biofertilizers, um, in as biocontrol agents, whatever else. So to really incorporate new sustainable agricultural practices, fungi have to be incorporated into that because they're a critical component of that. Likewise, for reforestation, afforestation initiatives, fungi are critically important to that. There's growing data to show that unless you think about the soil and the fungi that are present or incorporating those into your reforestation actions, you're not going to have success. Socially and economically, they of course play critical roles. These two young girls from Guatemala are proudly showing their fungi they're going to take to market as supplementing their income. And some cultures are very much tied into fungi. So for China, they have almost 1,800 edible fungi that they use, 800 medicinal fungi, 100 species are domesticated. So it is a critical component of their food and cultural systems. We also know that fungi are important pharmaceutically. So 10 of the 20 most profitable human medicines are derived from fungi, over $1 billion annually. So statins, anti-cholesterol medicine, antibiotics like penicillin, the first antibiotic that was produced, the immunosuppressants like cyclosporin A are all derived from fungi. Now, this is a fairly recent and set of activities in the West. Penicillin was found for World War II, so only the 1940s. But in Asia, they've been using fungi for medicinal purposes for thousands of years. And we keep finding new uses. So now psilocybin and other hallucinogens are being used for assisted psychotherapy, for distress, for PSTD, for end-of-life depression, for getting over other issues. And so fungi from a pharmaceutical and from a medicinal standpoint are critically important. And industrially, here on the left side of the screen are just some of the roles that fungi play in food ingredients. So the food we eat it's not just the wine and the beer and the bread, it's all the components that go into the rest of our food for enzymes, flavorings, vitamins, etc. And now fungi are being used for additional purposes, whether it is bioremediation of oil spills or of other toxins, or now being used for building materials and other uses. So fungi are being used in many, many ways. If you take all that together, fungi contribute enormously to the global economy. This article that came out a couple of years ago estimated that fungi contribute $54.57 trillion annually to the global economy. So fungi are diverse, ecologically important, and economically important. So we should be bothered a little bit by articles that talk about disappearing mushrooms, another mass extinction. But this isn't a new article. This was in a Science magazine in 1991, but fungi haven't really been getting the attention of, say, amphibians and other groups of organisms. But we shouldn't be surprised because fungi face the same threats as animals and plants: habitat loss, loss of symbiotic hosts, pollution, overexploitation, climate change, etc. So that brings me up to, how we're defining fungal conservation probably fits many other groups of conservation. It's an interdisciplinary activity combining science, communication, engagement, planning, and politics. And as Megan said, this is the first of 3 sessions focused on the political side of conservation, having fungi recognized by the public, conservation community, land managers, and policymakers to ensure that fungi are included in conservation actions and funding so they are conserved and used sustainably and equitably for the benefit of people. So it's not just that we're conserving fungi, but that fungi have value, have use, are important. And so we need to save them, not just for fungi's sake, but for humanity's. So what's our current status? What do we know about fungi as far as within the conservation sphere? There are now 1,300 fungi on the red list. 411 of those are threatened. They're critically endangered, are vulnerable, and another 110 are near threatened. So this is the first time we've had any indication of the conservation status of fungi. Only 15 years ago, there were 3 species on the IUCN Red List. So we're making progress. But if we look at where we are relative to other groups of organisms, you can see that we have a long way to go, right? 1,300 species out of a documented just under 200,000 species. So we're still at less than, 10% of all the species that are known, nevertheless of the estimated number of species. And if we look at that, there's major of what's been published so far, what's been looked at, what has been assessed, there's major taxonomic and geographic bias. Out of the 1,300 assessed species, 1,100 of them are basidiomycetes. So that's mushrooms, brackets, puffballs, those big showy fungi. Only 193 are ascomycetes, so less than 200 species are of the largest phyla of fungi. And of those, most of them are those are lichenized fungi. So most of the non-lichenized ascomycetes, which are estimated to be hundreds of thousands of species, have not been looked at. Geographically, 1,000 of the 1,300 are from North America or Europe. For example, only 106 of the species that have been assessed so far are from sub-Saharan Africa. And if we look at what has been assessed, there's a high number of data deficient species, which highlights the need to have additional information so that we can further understand the status of these species. And these assessments haven't been informed by indigenous or local knowledge. So kind of graphically, if we look at this, this is a map of the number of globally red listed fungal species. And you can see there's major swaths of the world where there is no information at all. And if we look at national red list, the situation isn't much better. And from a taxonomic standpoint, what we're saying is that there are no assessments. We don't have an idea of what's going on of the threat status for chytrids, for the zygomycetes, for the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, for most of the ascomycetes, nevertheless for tiny, really, really tiny microscopic fungi like Rosella, Microsporidia, etc. So we have a lot of work to be done to really document and understand what the threat status are of fungi. What's the chance of individual species of fungi, groups of species of fungi facing extinction risk. Now we're getting some idea on the distribution of fungi. This is the a view of the underground atlas that was produced last year by the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks. And what they did was they had people throughout the world do soil cores and then do eDNA, do sequencing from these soil cores to document kind of the broad scale distribution of one group of soil fungi, the mycorrhizal fungi. So arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, with this picture, and ectomycorrhizal species. And you can see from this for the arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi that this distribution is not evenly distributed across the landscape. There are certain areas that have much higher diversity than other areas. But what they were also able to do by mapping where these high areas of fungal richness is, and now this is just mycorrhizal fungi. If we had maps of other groups of fungi, we'd see different distribution patterns. But my guess is we'd see the same general conclusion, was that global hotspots for these fungi are poorly protected. Or we could look at this, most of Earth's critical underground fungi are unprotected. So there's been a couple of attempts to include fungi in spatially explicit mapping programs, etc. One of the major one is an attempt for identifying important fungus areas. And this was done in the UK back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and is now being reinitiated to hopefully have a bigger impact. So that's great. We can have local programs, super important because we know that much of conservation is local, so that's important. But globally, we know that there's a lot of information, not a lot of intent on understanding and protecting globally important areas for biodiversity. And that leads, to the 30 by 30 conservation initiative, right? The 30 by 30 specifically calls for effectively protecting and management of 30% of the world's terrestrial inland waters and coastal and marine areas by the year 2030. And the Nature Conservancy website says, put simply, 30 by 30 is the biggest conservation commitment the world has ever seen. To date, more than 100 countries have committed to achieve the global goal. So big deal. This is hot stuff within the conservation community. And the target includes both designated protection areas like national parks or things like that, and other effective area conservation measures like KBAs. And KBAs are key biodiversity areas, are globally significant sites for conservation, crucial places on our planet where unique species and ecosystems occur in important numbers or extent. So is the KBAs. This is a couple months old, but there are roughly 16,600 established KBAs. Fungi are only mentioned in 4 of those. So here we have the largest conservation initiative right now with the 30 by 30. KBAs play a critical role in countries reaching their goal, their commitment for 30 by 30, and fungi aren't being incorporated into that. Switch to some human related things. So these are some really fantastic pictures of people either people. You notice it's women um, uh, collecting Termitomyces, which is one of these. It's the fungus that the termites grow for their food source in Benin and in the Ivory Coast. And also then the last picture, D, is actually women and a couple of guys planting trees, native trees, with their mycorrhizal fungi associated with them to effectively do some reforestation effort. So, this just re emphasizes, especially in marginalized countries, especially for women, fungi become not only important food sources, but important uh, economic resources. Not much is being done to regulate or to support these efforts. Fair Wild is one of the NGOs that has now just started incorporating fungi into their certification standards, which is great. We need that. So they are documenting that fungi are sustainably harvested, that the supply chain is equitable, et cetera, et cetera. But that's one NGO, and there's a couple others that are starting to do that. But in reality, um, from a global perspective, from a political perspective, it is CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora. You notice they're lacking an F on there, no fauna, that provides uh, protection for organisms that are unsustainably harvested, where harvest are threatening the existence of those species. And fungi currently, there are no fungi on CITES, and incorporating fungi into CITES has some complications. So, you know, I think you can see from this that we're making progress. We've started to red list fungi. We're getting some idea, at least for some groups from some parts of the world, what the threat status are. Um, Kind of incipient efforts to include fungi into spatial planning and spatial recognition of important areas. Um, and well, we're not really there yet, but providing guidelines and protection for fungi through harvesting and other uses. So progress is being made, but it is not enough. And that's where, what we're talking about now, fungi and policy come into action. There are a couple of national and regional fungal strategies that have been initiated. UK developed a strategy in 1994. Um, it kind of didn't go too far, but it's now being updated, and it's really exciting to see what's going on there in the UK. And Rachel will be talking about that in the second of the webinars. Cuba put together a strategy in 1997. It's having enough of an impact in Cuba that they updated in 2022. And the Latin American and Caribbean countries started a conversation about developing a regional strategy, but that's still in just initial conversations. Nothing has been finalized. So these local strategies, are really important at the local context. And that's important because much of conservation is at the local context. But they haven't had much impact globally or outside of that local context. And so efforts are now underway to have fungi explicitly included in the Convention for Biological Diversity and other initiatives, including the Premier Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the International Initiative for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Soil Biodiversity, CITES, etc. And one of the really important initiatives that are going on now is the initiative led by the governments of Chile and the UK government, facilitated and really helped by the Fungi Foundation, which is the pledge for fungi, which is actually calling for CBD countries to recognize fungi as an independent kingdom of life in their national and international legislation, policies, and agreements, and asking them to incorporate fungi basically incorporate them into their policies. Super, super important. As I said, having fungi explicitly including policy is important. However, unless the policy is implemented, it has limited impact. And there are a growing number of countries that recognize the need to incorporate fungi, to include fungi in their conservation initiatives, but they don't know how to proceed. They're concerned that they don't know what to do, that the needed data and infrastructure are not available. And so they're hesitant to move forward because they want to start something that they can't accomplish. And so a strategy that lays out the actions and resources needed to enable countries to include fungi in their policies and actions would help alleviate the barriers to implementation and impact. So we looked around and tried to figure out, is there, any kind of um, analogs that we could use to try to move forward to think about this strategy. And the global strategy for plant conservation has been around since 2000, basically. And it was adopted by the CBD in 2002. It's now on its third iteration, and it's had a major positive impact on plant conservation. And just here was the scope of the strategy for the plants. They're talking about they're going to help increase the understanding and documentation of plant diversity, conserving plant diversity, using plant diversity sustainably, promoting and educating awareness about plant diversity, capacity build for plant diversity. And we thought, wow, what happens if we just do a search and replace? And every time it said plant, we put in fungus. So we're understanding and documenting fungal diversity, et cetera, et cetera. So started having conversations with leaders in the plant conservation community and thought leaders in the mycological community representing major research centers and mycological associations. Does this make sense? Is there something we should be doing? How should we proceed? And we got very positive feedback that this was a good idea, that we were moving in the correct direction. So we took it to the broader mycological community at the 12th International Mycological Congress in the Netherlands in August of 2024, had a well-attended and active workshop there where we talked about this. And this is a slide from the closing ceremony where it was agreed on the need to develop a global strategy for fungal conservation. The next step is we took ideas to COP16 in Colombia, and we developed a 16-page brief on the contributions of fungi to the global biodiversity framework, and had that there, talked to a lot of people. The folks on the left corner, that's Norun Yoro from Benin, and Ida Vasco are two representatives that were at COP, standing next to the Director General of IUCN. And we had really good feedback, a lot of opportunity to talk to people. And through all that consultation there, the decision was to move forward and to develop a global strategy for fungal conservation that was linked to the CBD global biodiversity framework, focused on those targets where including fungi are essential for their success, identify or suggest voluntary actions needed to facilitate the inclusion of fungi into their country conservation policies and action. And importantly, also guide development of a fungal conservation biodiversity research agenda. So we want this policy, this strategy, to be looking at this intersection between policy, countries, and the mycological conservation community that can work together to move fungal conservation forward. Why did we focus on the Convention for Biological Diversity? This was an agreement that was reached at the Rio Convention with 196 countries. It provides the global legal framework for actions on biodiversity. And so it is implemented through the Global Biodiversity Framework, which talks about taking urgent action to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by conserving and sustainably using biodiversity in a fair and equitable way. And the GBF has four main goals. A set that are about protecting and restoring biodiversity, having people prosper with nature, so as part of the partnership with nature, to share those benefits of nature fairly and equitably, and then to invest and collaborate so that those first three goals can be met. And to do that, there are 23 goals right now. The first set of 8 are talking about reducing the threat to biodiversity. So what are actions that we need to reduce, to mitigate, to prevent the loss of biodiversity, species, ecosystems, genetic diversity, so the broad concept of biodiversity. The second suite of targets, four of those, are meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. So the first set were focused on the species and the biodiversity. The second is how do people sustainably use that for the benefit of people? And then the last suite of targets are how do we implement that? Tools, solutions, financing to make that happen. And so we looked at these and identified uh, 13 targets, I think it's 13, that cannot be met unless fungi are included. In reality, fungi could be included in all of them, but these are the ones that we don't believe that countries can meet their obligation without incorporating fungi. And so those are all the targets for reducing the threats to biodiversity. Um, so everything from plants, from spatial planning to target for halting species extinction to using fungi, say, to ensure that fungi, all organisms, but especially fungi in this case, are being sustainably harvested, reduce invasive alien species, reducing pollution, and minimizing the impact of climate change. And then targets that using fungi will enable people to get the benefits from biodiversity. So again, managing wild species sustainably, enhancing biodiversity and sustainability in agriculture, restore, maintain, and enhance nature's contributions to people. And then really focused on target 20, which is capacity building, technology transfer, and scientific and technical cooperation for biodiversity. How do we put up with this? How do we develop the strategy? Well, Katya and I started thinking about this about 2 years ago. Rachel joined us a little bit after that. And we pulled together a team, the Global Fungal Conservation Network, which now numbers over 100 people from universities, research, conservation institutions, NGOs, etc., worldwide, that have been providing information, have been helping write the different targets that we've been, the different actions that we've suggested for the targets. And now the Global Fungal Network is open to all interested parties. Anybody who's interested in that, and I think Katya probably just put the link into the chat. Here's where we also need you. The draft for the consultation is now out for review, and we need that to be broadly reviewed. We want to make sure that the community has a chance to comment, that we get it right. It has to represent the, the, the will and the knowledge of the community. So please take some time, review that, send in your comments. And again, the links to do that are in the chat. And then we will officially launch it at the Conference of the Parties in Armenia this October. So just to kind of a quick preview, Katya will be going through this in more detail on the 9th. But here's kind of what the strategy looks like. We have a long preamble that talks about the importance of it, some of the key issues that go throughout it. That's the need to think about indigenous people, local communities, issues like that. But for each of the targets, we start talking about, here is the global biodiversity framework target, why fungi have to be incorporated in that, and then a suite of recommended actions, suggested actions, and then a suite of research and infrastructure priorities that are needed to be done in partnership with parties to put that together. So the mycological, the conservation community working in consort with NGOs, with policymakers, whatever, to implement these priorities. And then we want to show that things are actually possible, that some of this is actually going on. So there's a whole list now of case studies that talk about what is working. So these are just two examples, mainstreaming fungi in the national biodiversity policy in Mexico, some examples of what's going on in Brazil, in Vienna, in other places where fungi are being incorporated into their policies. So let me just close by saying, this is really a critical moment for fungal conservation. We are approaching the tipping point when fungi are fully integrated into conservation policies and actions. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. But getting buy-in and implementation of the global strategy for fungal conservation by countries, researchers, conservation practitioners, and funders will go a long way to making that a reality, a long way to ensuring that fungi are mainstreamed into conservation policy, conservation action, so we can meet our goal, our need of incorporating fungi in conserving fungi and using them for the benefit of people. Thank you very much. I think we'll open it up now if there's any questions. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh no, there's one more. Better not stop sharing yet. Katya will get mad at me. Here's the feedback and strategy to join the feedback and the strategy is on your left. And then if you want to join, we encourage you to join the Global Fungal Conservation Network. That's on that, whatever. So yeah, and then here's our emails. So I'll leave that up for a second. And then turn it over. I don't know if there are questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, but I'll turn it over to that. So Megan, why don't I let you run the show from now? I'll turn this off in a second, but just give people a couple of seconds to get the QR code and our emails.
Absolutely. And we don't have any questions just yet, so I will stall and I will ask you a question
Yeah.
while everyone's signing up and thinking of their questions. Um this is one of our kind of standard questions from the Reverse the Red side of things because we are all about hope and optimism, and to me this feels like a very hopeful, optimistic project of moving fungal conservation in the right direction and having people recognize it. So for this whole strategy, and I can actually ask all three of you, which part of either the process or the strategy itself is bringing you a lot of hope right now?
For me, it's that, as mentioned, I was having a conversation with Katya earlier today. I don't think we've got one negative comment back from anybody who we've talked to about this. Everybody's been very supportive, saying that, yep, it's needed and that we're moving in the right direction. So that excites me. That we haven't hit a wall that says, what the heck are you people doing? Why are we doing this? What's the need? We haven't had that. But I'll turn it over to my compatriots here to see if they've got cool things for them.
Yeah, I can just jump in to say that something that really excites me about the process is how everyone is coming together. I love how this is really became a joint effort from the mycological community and beyond, and how yeah, we're receiving great feedback and contributions, and people are being very generous with their time. So I really like how this became a collaboration from the wider community.
And along that line, the number of people joining the network keeps going up and up. We started out with 46, I think it was the first time we officially counted, and now we're well over 100. So yeah, so people join up. We want you.
Yeah, and I think just to add from my perspective is that this is such an exciting time for fungi, and to have this strategy, I don't think we can really underestimate how important this is. It's the first strategy of its kind, and we're really looking at it to advance and scale up fungi conservation across the world. And it's so important to have this. We've seen how it's really the similar strategy for plants has helped plants, but adapting this for fungi, it's not just about showing, guiding, providing that information, but really, like we said, engaging this community beyond just the mycological experts as well, which is why this consultation is so important. It's not just about bringing your expertise to this because you're a fungi expert, and please don't think you have to be that to contribute to the strategy. We want people to have a look at it and say, you know, is there things in their country that we're missing, or is there any way this strategy might be better taken up by policymakers? All of that kind of stuff, which is important for a strategy in itself, but is really part of this consultation. So that's why it's really exciting. We want all your voices in because we want to make it as strong as possible when we take it to COP later in the year.
Wonderful. I love all of those answers. We do have a couple of questions in our Q&A now. This one is from Hannah. They work in soil health and mycorrhizal fungi, and so they're wondering, this may be more applied and utility focused than what you all are talking about, potentially, but they want to know, were you thinking that those targets, maybe 7 or 8, would be later phases or something like that? And how does that kind of applied and utility focused soil health and mycorrhizal fungi fit in? They have another question about commercial mushroom production as well. And so wondering about those types of things.
So I don't think we're talking about necessarily staggering the introduction of these. They're all there, but we are recommending we have an implementation recommendation, and we recognize that everybody can't do everything at one time. So our recommendation is for either the country or whatever else to whatever their priorities are, start with their highest priorities and work through there. So if you're an NGO or you are a policy person that's in forestry, then that could be your key priority, and that would be the thing you'd start with first, right? So, and we do talk about the need to incorporate fungi into these kind of actions, um, and some of the things to look for and be concerned about, like um, to being ensure that these will be done in a responsible way. That's not introducing something that could escape and whatever else. So that's all in the policy, I think.
Great. Katya or Rachel, anything to add? Okay.
Oh, and if you're
Then,
talking about growing commercial fungi, we do have a
yeah,
section, that comes across in several places, right? That comes across in Target 4 for ex-situ conservation from a conservation standpoint. It comes in to reduce pressures, so for the targets on sustainable use. But it also comes in under invasive species to make sure that the fungi that are being grown commercially are done in a responsible manner so that they don't escape and become a problem. Like there are a couple of species now that we're dealing with, the golden oyster and a couple other species that are now escape cultivation and are very active, very aggressive invasive species. So you think of the topic of, I think that's was one of the challenges we had, but also one of the exciting things is so many of these targets are linked, right? You can't really talk about you can't talk about target 4 without talking about, which is uh, conserving biodiversity and genetic diversity, without talking about some of these other things. You've got to have, spatial planning to do that. You can't talk about that without talking about how sustainable use is. So they're all linked. And so that was one of the exciting things, but also somewhat the challenging thing, to make sure that we show those linkages without repeating the same thing on every target. So anyway, yeah. But I guess the statement would be, no matter what you're interested in, where your entry point would be, there's things. If you're talking about fungi, you're going to find it within the strategy, I think. Um,
excellent. We next have a question from Isabel, After the strategy is presented in Armenia, what would be the minimum outcome or outcomes from that that would make you happy to start with?
I'm going to let
That's a very
Katya
good
or Rachel go to
question.
that one just because I talk too much.
That's a very good question. I think what we're doing when we go there, we've got a purpose not just to launch it, but the global strategy for plant conservation is embedded in the CB processes and it's a formal document recognized by the CBD. We haven't gone down that route with this strategy because it's complicated and takes a lot of time, and we really wanted to get it out there. So our purpose is to engage as many countries as possible in knowing about the strategy and finding out about it, and so that they can take it away with them and start, and we can help support them to implement it in a national level, but also it's getting that wider community involved. And one of the purposes of being Armenia is to have a presence where our community comes together and shows what they're doing, all the exciting work that they're involved with that shows how they're implementing the strategy. So lots of people are working on fungi already. Lots of people have fungi, work on fungi planned. And we want to show that this is already ticking those actions off. And in ticking those actions off in the global strategy for fungi, they're also helping their countries meet the targets of the GBF. So it's really important. And if we come away engaging just a few of those countries or loads of countries, that'll be really exciting for us. And just having a booth, a fungi booth at COP is a real game changer, because I really don't think it's happened before. I don't think we've had a dedicated space where the community comes together, shows off their work. We launch the strategy, we have it alongside the pledge. It's a really big deal, and I think that in itself is just exciting.
Yeah, I think the booth and what we're going to be doing at COP and the opportunity to talk to people and have the strategy is a really great initial outcome. I think longer term is as we track implementation, as we start seeing fungi being incorporated in um, actions, as they might be represented in countries, uh, national, NBSAPs or other thing. Who knows? We have, there's different ways that we'll be able to track it. But one of the ways I think that we'll know whether it's working is if we see countries' conservation actions work. So if we see success in, say, reforestation actions, all these big, massive plantings, if they're working, that means that fungi are incorporated into those because they can't do it without fungi. So we'll be able to see kind of by seeing conservation working writ large, to be able to be successful, we know that fungi have been incorporated, and then we'll feel good because we feel that fungi are getting their due, and they're being that. I mean, our goal here is, I mean, we love fungi, right? We want that, but our goal is because we want to see the planet survive and do well, and we believe that fungi have to be incorporated into that. So when we see that, that's a little longer term than just Armenia in November, in October. I mean, yeah.
So we do have two other questions about COP and Armenia. And so one of these is from Patricia. Can you talk a little bit more about the pledge at at COP? And then the second one is from Whitney, just wondering why there hasn't been a fungi booth at COP before. And if you could share a little bit more about what this like first time will signify.
Yeah, do you want me? I can take that. Why not? Um, so yeah, we see that there is, close coordination between the pledge, the UK and Chilean pledge, and the strategy. The strategy is kind of the implementation component of the pledge. The pledge is calling for incorporation, you know, putting fungi in words in documents, right? We want to make sure that there is implementation and action that goes with it. And what the strategy is doing is providing help so that it will be implemented. So I think that's how those two things tie together. Um, so Whitney, the reason there, I think because we're finally getting to a point where for why there hasn't been a booth at COP before is fungi until recently haven't even been part of the conversation. It's partially, I guess, the mycologist's fault for not forcing the issue, but I don't think anyone was listening either. I think we needed to get to a point where, we have wonderful writers and journalists that are writing great stories about the importance of fungi. We have the growing number of countries that are recognizing, or NGOs that are recognizing. We have Reverse the Red doing webinars for us and things like that. So I think the situation is just to the place where the time is right to do it.
Wonderful. One other question on a maybe slightly more challenging level. Susanna is curious about the main barriers that we have to face to keep the momentum going and actually implementing it, and how we can address those barriers moving forward.
Excuse me.
Katia, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Uh, this is a hard one. I think the
So I'll
main
pass
barrier
it to
is
you.
really, yes, thank you, Rachel. Uh, no, I think the main barriers so far really have been the lack of funding. And I know everyone complains about funding, but it's it's hard because fungi are not easy to see, as Greg showed in his slides. You see the trees, you first see the animals, then you start seeing the plants, and the fungi are always hiding, right? So we don't see them. Well, let's start with that. The lack of data, we have a huge backlog compared with other groups of species. So it's just easier to invest the limited resources we have into animals and plants where you know more rather than fungi. And that just creates a snowball of lack of mycologists. Usually, mycologists don't have stable and secure jobs, not a lot of organizations doing fungal conservation. So I would say that were the main barriers. And I think we're getting to a point where people are recognizing, as Greg mentioned throughout his presentation, the importance of fungi. We can't do restoration without thinking about the mycorrhizal fungi that will support the establishment of those plants. We keep seeing restoration projects failing because the soil community wasn't taken into account. And people are finally starting to realize that we can't do effective conservation without fungi. So we hope to build on that momentum. And we hope the strategy is the tool that countries, NGOs, and the mycological community need to guide our priorities, which things, where are the gaps, what can we already do, and yeah, move on.
Yeah,
I don't know if
I end some of my talks um, with kind of a phrase that, I think we're to the point now where NGOs, some countries, whatever else, recognize the importance of fungi to meet their things, but they respond that they don't have the resources, the personnel, the funding to incorporate. They can't afford it. And we got to get to the point where they recognize they can't afford not to include fungi. And so that's what we're working on, is we're hoping the strategy will provide enough tools that they say, oh yeah, we can afford this, we can do this, because we know what we're doing and we have the tools to do it. So that's where we are.
Wonderful. We have a couple more questions, but I think I will give them to Greg and Katya and Rachel, and maybe they could answer them next time around, as we are running out of time here. But quick reminder, I did just put the link in the chat to hopefully have everyone register for the next two sessions as well. the conversation will continue from here and discuss, as Greg mentioned, more about the strategy. And then the third session is really an open discussion for questions and feedback. So please come to that one as well. Yeah, Greg, Katya, Rachel, anything else to add to convince everyone to read the strategy, give their feedback, and keep coming to these sessions?
Hopefully this did convince them, Megan.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody that was on here. That was great. Encourage you to come in 2 weeks, and also thank Megan and Reverse the Red for providing us with this platform to highlight the strategy and the need to incorporate fungi. So that's great.
Yeah, thanks, Megan, so much.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks all. See you again soon, hopefully.